everyone, welcome. Thanks for joining. So today we'll be talking about scaling startups, which is a pretty broad topic. We're going to try to focus it a bit more on procurement, having two procurement founders in our midst, but also have some questions that are maybe a bit more generic questions about how to get funding, any tips, insights that they can share. So let's get started. And I want to start with Tarek and Stephany, maybe Stephany first. So the procurement industry is notoriously difficult to disrupt. I think people tend to be maybe a bit more cautious with any new innovations that might come along. So how have you sort of handled that situation, or what have you done to convince?
I think it's changed dramatically in the last few years, but I think when I started TealBook 7 years ago, we were, in a much different environment. The understanding of technology, of data, was not quite there. There was playbooks. I think there was a belief that cloud technology was going to solve all problems. And so what I felt was really important from the beginning was to build thought leadership so that we could start educating the market on technology. And so we spent a lot of time, I used to do blog posts regularly, start creating content, start also partnering with the analysts that understood sort of the future or maybe advocated for the future. I think that thought leadership has given us a lot of credibility and also helped us to be a thought leader in the data space, and I think it's benefiting us a lot. I think procurement doesn't want to be sold to. Procurement wants to learn how they can bring more value to the organization, so the more information you can give them on how they can do that, I think builds partnerships.
Yeah. Okay, and sorry, my mistake, and I realized that we have missed the introductions. Might make sense to start with those, so anyone knows actually what kind of companies we're talking to. So maybe can you very briefly explain what TealBook does?
Yeah, so we are a supplier data platform. We enrich data. We automate the collection, the enrichment, and the distribution of supplier data across our customers' workflow and processes. We also have an application that supports use cases that are not well served by the S2P market, mostly how you access actionable insight that's needed across the entire end-to-end procurement lifecycle.
Great. So Tarek, maybe start with a very brief explanation what Fairmarkit does and how you have conquered procurement in the industry.
I wouldn't say conquered by any means, but thank you for having me. My name's Tarek. I live in Miami. So Fairmarkit, we're a sourcing platform. We plug into any solution, and we help automate just the process of sourcing that's usually left on manual tasks. People push paper. I'm 32. Nobody wants to just call and get quotes. It's kind of a tough task. And so I think to answer one of the questions you asked, it's really, I think procurement's in the early innings. And so Mark Andreessen wrote a post, software's eating the world, but if you really look at procurement and then you look at marketing tech or sales tech, there's very few suppliers even at this conference. But if you go to like Salesforce, their conference, or you go to Oracle, there's tons of vendors. Mm-hmm. And so, I think we're in a very fortunate position with our customers that we're maybe in the early innings, like first inning. We're probably at like 10, not even 10% saturation. We're at like the 1 or 2% time. And so I think we're in a very fortunate place and great time to be alive.
Great. And Nidhi, maybe also to briefly hear from you, talk about Portcast a little bit, and then explain some of the challenges you have faced as an early stage startup.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm Nidhi. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Portcast, headquartered in Singapore. What we do at Portcast is we predict how cargo moves across the world on ships, and if external disruptions from a typhoon or a port congestion to a Suez Canal blockage or a geopolitical conflict, how does that impact cargo movement? So essentially trying to make supply chains more efficient and sustainable, and how it links with procurement is looking at the reliability of the carriers and the transport that has been procured. And whether the cost that you've been paying has actually delivered value that was intended to. So in terms of the challenges that we've had, I think, again, very similar. to what was said before, supply chain and procurement in general has been kind of like a back office function compared to all of the other functions in a corporate. But with the last couple of years, with all the disruptions that we've seen, it's come to the forefront and people realize, how important supply chains and movement of cargo and logistics is. So that's been really great. As an early stage company, we were kind of knocking on customers' doors, talking about this, and it kind of turned the other way around in our favor, so that's been really great. And I think the other sort of big challenge is as a startup, trying to position yourself as a software player and as an enterprise software player, not just as a young startup with technology that's kind of nascent. It's fully functional technology that's being used by large B2B enterprises, and I think that positioning is kind of something we're kind of still moving along on, but that I think is one of the biggest challenges early stage companies.
Yeah, because I think that's an interesting point, but how exactly, I think everyone would sort of understand it makes sense to position yourself as more professional, as enterprise ready, but how do you do that? Like, do you have some actionable tips or strategies to share here?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was spoken before is really about creating thought leadership, creating content which is challenging, because that's what we do as startups. We talk about new things, we talk about new ideas, and the more we promote ourselves about it, the more we create content which is interesting, which is, even if it triggers some thought in the minds of the persona that we're targeting, I think that really changes the positioning. So I think that's one. And I think the second thing is really the initial marquee customers who took a bet and took a leap of faith that this is technology and this is a company that we want to work with, this makes sense. Kind of getting referrals from them, I think that builds the momentum a lot more and builds trust in enterprises that, okay, this is real. Someone else in our exact space has already done it and proven the technology. I think those are two things that have been, working so far.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another thing that came up when we had our prep call, and something I can definitely imagine could be a problem when you are still an early stage startup, is saying no to customers, big customers that would like something that might be a little bit different from what you have in mind, but you really want to pull them in. So maybe a question for Stephany, how to, either try to keep the customer or at least stay true to your roadmap.
Well, I think the challenging thing when you're building a data company is that the use cases are endless, because once you feed data into a functional team that need to meet certain requirements, I mean, we can list 150 use cases probably, within an hour. And so it's narrowing down to what our customers were trying to achieve. And that's a bit of the challenge. And then what we were doing with those early clients is identify which use case matters most. And then we had to find a way for our customers to consume that information in a way that they could understand. And we've been buying software because it's something you can see. When you're talking about data, it's sort of, you're buying the house because you can see the house, but if the foundation of the house doesn't exist, and the house will, break at some point, or you don't really have that foundation. So we were trying to sell the foundation without the house. So we had to build an application to expose, and then our clients, we looked at the use cases, like what's low risk and high reward that we could prove that you can improve the quality of data over time on a specific attribute. And what we found is initially discovery was a good one because our data didn't need to be perfect to point to companies that were most similar. And so we exposed a search engine in our application that would drive finding contingent suppliers across the world on categories, et cetera. And then it was one of our large clients who said, if you could automate supplier diversity for us, because the collection of certificates through portals is very challenging. We think we're actually probably under-reporting maybe 50 to 100 suppliers. So if you could identify that and automate part of our reporting, which takes 6 to 8 weeks, that's really manual. It takes a lot of time. We have to do it 4 times a year. And so we went all out to prove, and show, and we had come back with 800 suppliers that were under-reported, and that made a huge difference. And so we were then able, with one customer, say, okay, we have a use case right now that customers can buy, because when you're a startup, you need customers that pay money for your solution so that you can attract investors and build better products so that you can continue to reinvest in your technology. And so those early clients that really understand how to buy and how to drive tangible value is invaluable.
I think Stephany brought up a good point. There's two different cycles. There's I find product market fit, I think this is interesting. And then there's also, will you pay money for this? And I think a lot of startups miss that completely. And part of the challenge is selling to the enterprise early on. Some people want it for free, and that's not gonna happen. And the difference between finding something for free and then finding something valuable early on or wanting to have a conversation are two very different mechanisms.
Yeah. So, and saying no, like we have customers who are trying to pull into software more. Like, can you build RFI tools, RFP tools? Like, there's like 100 sourcing tools you can buy, including Fairmarkit. Right?
Thank you.
And so we don't want to replace that. We want to augment it. And so it was really challenging to say no, because it's a lot of shiny object with revenue and budget. And so you have to know who you are, what you're focusing your investment in, and then be able to say no is hard, but it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, so, the product market fit, once you kind of find it, then I think, the saying no becomes hard because you have a goal, you have a North Star, and you want to keep running towards it. But then there might be customers or use cases which also make money. People are willing to put money on the table for that, but then it's distracting. And as a startup, you have limited resources, limited time, and you just want to do, what's making sense. And that's hard to just say, no, we can't do this, we can't distract our team, even though it might lead to something in the future.
I think product market fit, though, is one of the biggest bullshit words of all time because it's always going to get better. And so if you hire the right people, you work on the right goals, you surround yourself with the right customers, it's going to get better. And so product always gets better, customers' interaction with the product can get better. But if you try to say, I'm going to go build something in a lab and then release it to customers, that's like a huge fugazi, so to speak.
100%.
So staying in early stage for one more question, maybe starting with Tarek. If there's one thing in hindsight that you could have changed or done differently during the early days of your startup?
I think I don't regret anything. I think the hardest challenge of starting a company is hiring the right people. And I think I'm very fortunate to surround myself with some of the best people I've ever worked with or known. And that's been really rewarding. And so I think you learn from your mistakes and don't really. But
how have you been able to surround yourself with such great people? Is it your
a great
people
question.
skills? Yeah.
That is a great question.
You just got lucky there, or what happened? You have a great network?
No, so you don't get it right the first time, and I think you learn a lot from your mistakes, and I think we continue to sometimes hire the wrong people, and being a good judge, I think the culture you surround yourself with, I think really important to listen to your employees as well. Friends, coworkers, whatever you call it, but usually they usually say, hey, I don't think this person's a great fit. What are they doing all day? And once you know that or you hear that, then you kind of know something's up. And so I think the culture you build early on helps you build the company that you want to grow.
There's the CEO Snowflake who said, if you're asking the question, you know the answer.
Yes.
Because if you have a super performer, you don't question if they're the right person.
Same with customers too. I was fortunate to be, joined by customers last night for dinner. And, one of the things we were talking about, it's our job as founders is not really different from a lot of procurement professionals. It's the people you bring around the table and how well they do at their job and how well they execute. It's similar to us, right? Whether you hire a good sales rep, a good product manager, whether you hire a good category manager, it's kind of the same thing. It really comes down to managing people and helping those people learn, grow, and, develop.
Yeah. But then, so you have your company culture, you are an early stage startup, at some point you're growing, you have to hire new people, your organization changes. How do you maintain that company culture that you love and that you want to keep, maybe for Stephany?
Yeah, I mean, we when we were 15 employees, we got in a room and we said, what kind of company, it's really special to be able to define what a company is going to be and look like, and you're going to be really proud of being part of. And so we involve our engineers, our product team, everyone on the team to say, okay, what matters most to you? And we came up with 4 core values. And I think having them being part of it, then I don't know if you've read Tribal Leadership, it's a fantastic book, and it's sort of what does a culture allow? And the culture will allow the right behavior. And so if someone is negative or venting, the person receiving that information is as guilty. It's redirecting to say, hey, have you talked to this person? If you need coaching, to provide constructive feedback. well, we really live by our values. We have shout outs. We do, awards based on our values. We bring our, even our OKRs back to our values and trying to protect it, because now, we've grown from 25 to 60. We're 160 or so people right now, all remote. It's pretty amazing that we've been able to accomplish this, and knock on wood, we still have, we just won Best Place to Work in Canada, and we don't have that many Canadian, people, but it was, pretty rewarding to have a remote culture at scale.
Great. Well, congrats.
Thank you.
With that.
I'm a big Canada fan. Huge Drake guy personally, so. TealBook, Drake.
Oh, sorry. Moving on to funding, obviously also a very relevant topic for early stage founders, founders further down the line. So Fairmarkit and TealBook are Series B, Portcast Series A. You've had, I think, a fair share of experience with investors pitching, your startup, pitching your ideas. Maybe starting with Nidhi for this question, like what is the one thing that you've learned during this process that helps, helps pitch better, helps convince VCs, angel investors maybe more early on?
The one thing that's a hard question. There are many things. Just think about, so I actually really enjoyed the fundraising process whenever I've done it. There's always great questions that make you think about, how the business is growing. So, they're all valid questions and that the investors are asking. I think the couple of things that I would say, one, it's been really important to understand who we also want to bring on the table. So not just, the other way around where the VC kind of accepts you or wants to invest in you, but, if you have options, being able to understand what more beyond capital does the investor really bring to the table. I think that's one critical thing for every startup to remember and think about and ask questions. And again, the asking questions is, it goes beyond just the fundraising process. Every time there's a board meeting, every time there's an investor discussion, having those asks, these are the things that we need help on, and what can you bring to the table? How can you support us, besides just, the updates that we're giving you? So I think the relationship has to be both ways, and beyond capital. So I think that's one really important thing. And I think the other thing is, having at the early stage, it's really about the investors betting on the company, more than the company, the founders, and the story, whether the market has potential or not. And then as the company builds, it's really about how do you replicate the success of those initial customers and make it a replicable flywheel for revenue generation. And is the business making sense at the unit economics level? Is it sustainable? I think especially in the current times, it's less about just ingesting money into the business without thinking of whether it's going to be sustainable in the long run. So I think fundamentally the business has to make sense, and I think that's what VCs also really care about.
And Stephany, I saw an interview with you where you mentioned that early on an investor has told you, I think straight to your face, that you had 100% chance of failing raising capital?
Well, if I look at myself back then, I'm not Tarek's age. I have 3 girls. Didn't have a tech background. Now I had the understanding of the space. I built a consulting firm in procurement, so I saw the problem firsthand for many, many years and tried to kill the idea for 9 years. Cloud technology needed to exist, machine learning needed to exist, and when I saw all the stars align, I decided to take a chance and do it. And I did it a bit the stupid way. Again, like Tarek had co-founder, so smart. I did this by myself thinking like I'm just gonna do it. And it's risky for investors, right? When you see someone like me, luckily I was really fortunate to have the support of early angels, and then once I started winning customers, then it was the proof points I needed to then attract institutional capital. But even the technology of TealBook, it's not easy to explain that the data will get better over time. The use cases are endless. It's gonna be powering all these software that have promised good data, right? So you're kind of disrupting a space, you're creating a new category, and that was quite challenging to explain, not only to customers, but also to investors. But when we start finding the analogy of the sales and marketing space, like the customer data platforms, the Zoom Info of this world, who fed data into the CRM systems to produce better outcome, those analogy really showed investors like, okay, now I see the parallel, now I understand it. And so in the early days, I think to your point, it's really much about the founder, the knowledge, there's some early proof points of customers, and then how big this opportunity is. And we look at every sector, every single enterprise has data challenges today, so it's a huge TAM, and that attracted investors early on. But
I will
definitely
say,
a lot of struggles.
It's very impressive. As a man, I'm very fortunate that it's easier for me to get funding than women, and it's an unfortunate part of venture capital today and starting a business. So what they've done is much harder than us at Fairmarkit as 3 male co-founders. And so I take a second to say that, is I think it's like 80%, 90%, it's like men get funding versus women.
3% women.
3% women.
3.
And I think the space is changing, but it's still a very uphill battle that I think, I'm fortunate.
So no one has ever told you there's a 0% you would raise capital?
Oh, no. So I'm glad you didn't ask me the question, because I'm very opinionated on VCs. Like, there's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And the tier 1 investors, we're fortunate to have like Hindsight, GGV, there's Founders Fund, Sequoia. There's tier 1 investors, there's tier 2 investors, some investors at this thing I've never heard of. And so you want to surround yourself with tier 1 investors because it's great for recruiting, full stop. And I think VCs, whether they want to admit it or not, make irrational decisions. And so it's very different than a sales process where if you're selling your company, you have to understand at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. You're selling part of your company and part of the people that have chosen to work for you. And, it's kind of like, the difference between getting a Ferrari and getting a Honda Civic. You want a Ferrari, and so you want to surround and sell yourself and get a Ferrari. And I think some founders forget that in the process. And so the quicker you can run a fundraising process, better you can set a timeline, sell your company, the better you'll do in the process.
I don't know how many founders are here, but I think the most helpful thing as we raised a couple of rounds, Series A, Series B, were both preemptive rounds. And it was really important to define your thesis, and that thesis shouldn't change across all the different rounds. And then what we found is that putting milestones that were pretty impressive but achievable over the next 2 quarters, and every time we hit a milestone, I remember one time it was like winning these 7 customers in this quarter, to have a first, data foundation appointed by an analyst to win this partnership. And then every time it happened, we'd be like, boom, to the investors, and they get so excited. And so when it was time to say, okay, we're waiting for, our metrics to make sure that they're right. If not, we'll delay. And then the moment say like, okay, I think we're right. You can feel already from investors contacting you because now they know you've hit all your milestones. And so we've been really fortunate. The process got significantly easier because it's not about me. It's about the execution. It's about our metrics. It's about the proof points that our customers are able to speak on behalf of you.
Yeah, we just raised our Series C, and it's not really like us that raised our Series C. It's the company that raised our Series C, and it's the people. Big shout out to my team that's there, but like people like Emma, Tristan, Colin, that raised our Series C together. And, it's, I'd argue, one of the toughest fundraising environments in the world right now. And it's because of the people that we brought on.
So I actually have some questions, and I see 2 more minutes left, so let's get started with them. I think the first one is for, I think both Stephany and Tarek. How should ecosystems, and it's between quotation marks, how should the ecosystems model be a key part of scaling growth or not? TealBook surrounds systems, Fairmarkit is a stand solution. How to think about each model? So maybe start with Stephany.
And I'm going to try to make sure that I clearly answer the question. I think for us, from a go-to market, I'm assuming, is that?
I was thinking it was more of like, do you partner with SAP or not?
Oh yeah, okay, so it's more from a go-to market perspective. So our data can flow into any workflow processes, digital solution, ERP, et.cetera. So that is so important for our strategy. A couple of years ago when COVID hit, an M&A firm contacted me, I didn't answer, contacted me again, I didn't answer. The CEO called me, he's like, why are you not answering my M&A? Like, because we're not for sale. And he's like, don't you want to retire? I'm like, in my cottage in Ontario? No. No, we've got a chance at building this. And if I showed an ounce of interest to those software companies who were looking to acquire us, they would never partner with us and ingest our data into their solutions. So it was so important to stay agnostic. And it was hard to navigate, right? Because your board is like, well, what are they would be offering? I'm like, if I show that we're interested and we think we have a real shot, we're swinging for the fence to build a really successful, sustainable company. And I would be so proud to take this company public one day. And so, it's really important to our distribution. It's really important for our customers to know that we have bespoke integrations. We have data packs that go with another solution. And so, again, our position in the market is to be agnostic and power all.
We're in a similar position, but I would just like caution early stage companies of like trying to partner. You have to build it yourself. And a company like SAP is not going to partner with you unless you chase customers. And so we're fortunate that we've got enough scale of customers who want to work with us that now SAP wants to partner with us.
Yeah.
You're not just going to go up to SAP and be like, hey, I have one customer, partner with me. Huge waste of time.
If I can add, I think from a customer perspective also, if you look at large enterprises, there are quite some options that they have. There are quite some technologies that they have or platforms that they have. And they don't want their users to be going on multiple platforms eventually. So integratability and ecosystem from that perspective, definitely makes sense from a long-term sustainability perspective. Also, when we talk about ecosystems, amongst startups, amongst technology players, there is integratability and there is value in joining hands in order to provide a full suite of solution to the end customer.
Okay, so that's all the time we have, unfortunately. There were a few more questions, but maybe if you have a question, I think all of these lovely people will be happy to answer them in person as well.
Or stop by the booth, Fairmarkit.
Or stop by the booth.
22.
And then thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your stories with us today. And thanks for joining for the audience.
Thank you so much. Thank you.